My name is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone. I run Spainguru.es. This is the Spanish Taxes Webinar 2025. Today's Tuesday, the 29th of July, 2025. And a little bit about Spanguru. Our objective is facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014. And you can find some wonderful reviews about Spanguru online on Trustpilot and also on Google. So you are in good hands. About Spainguru.es, you can use it for absolutely free. It is a platform with many resources like a weekly newsletter that is sent every Monday, YouTube channel with almost 1,000 videos, blog posts, more than 1,750 articles, and of course, a vibrant community of Facebook groups and subreddits with an aggregated total of 150,000 members, with big groups like Spanish Immigration Group, Non-Lucrative Visa, Digital Nomad Visa, and so much more that I highly recommend to join today. And also, I feature 6 webinars, 5 of them on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis, Non-Lucrative Visa, Digital Nomad Visa, Move to Spain, Spanish Taxes, and Portugal Golden Visa. You can also use a very new tool that I just published less than 1 month ago, a Move to Spain checklist. If you go to Spainguru.es, you will find a card that sends you to the Move to Spain checklist. Basically, it's every single step described in detail if you plan to move to Spain starting 1 year before. So all the related investigation articles, videos, related services that you need in order to move to Spain smoothly. And of course, my vetted partners. I have recommended my partners for many years. Many of them, I have used them personally. Myself, immigration experts, tax advisors, financial planners. And if you're planning to apply for a Spanish visa, many auxiliary services that for sure you will need, like compliant health insurances, medical certificates, phone translations, apostille services, and auxiliary services when you move to Spain or you're living in Spain, like bank accounts, money transfer services, property rentals, and even mortgages if you plan to purchase property in Spain. All that and 100 services more personally vetted by me on Spainguru.es. A little disclaimer here about the presentation. This is for general information only, and it's not legal, financial, or tax advice. For personal guidance, consult with a qualified advisor, which I am not. Find trusted experts at Spainguru.es. Spanguru is not liable for errors or outcomes from using this information. However, I hope that you take a lot of value from this webinar. My objectives for today is that you gain an overview of Spanish taxes, you understand key tax categories in Spain, and learn the basic principles of taxation in Spain. I hope that you get more prepared for having more informed informed conversations with tax advisors, so you engage more effectively with them and ask more precise questions. So you speak basically the same language as them, right? And when you receive the questions, you're more informed and you understand deeper how those answers can apply to your specific case. Clarify the role of professional tax advice and understand that this webinar just will be a general information and will never replace personalized tax advice, because individual circumstances have a significant impact in your tax liabilities, okay? So hopefully you will also, after this webinar, you will identify key considerations like potential tax implications with a focus on US and UK nationals, but I would say like 99% of the content of this webinar will apply to any nationality moving to Spain. Be aware of the compliance requirements and deadlines to avoid potential penalties. Okay, we're gonna go through the calendar as well and deadlines for the different tax obligations. Now, let's start with probably the most important concept in Spanish tax. It's Spanish tax residency. You become a Spanish tax resident in Spain and must pay tax on your global income and potentially on the net value of your assets held abroad and inside Spain, if any of these conditions apply. First, and most important, if you spend over 183 days in Spain within a calendar year, from January 1st to December 31st. The days that you spend in Spain count, even if they are not consecutive and regardless of your immigration status. For instance, if you come in Spain as a tourist, those days also count and will be added if you come to Spain later on under a visa or residency. Okay, so every day counts. And remember that tax year goes from January 1st to December 31st, whereas immigration year is a natural year, not a calendar year. So if you enter Spain on June 1st, for example, 2025, your immigration year will go until June 1st, 2026. Okay, so it's important because those years may overlap or not. Second condition, your main economic activity or primary income source is in Spain. And the third one, okay, tax authorities may say that you are a Spanish tax resident because of your center of interest is in Spain if your spouse or minor children are permanent residents in Spain. Now, how can I avoid becoming a tax resident in Spain as per the first condition? If you arrive to Spain after July 2nd, you will avoid making yourself a tax resident during that calendar year because there's only 182 days left until December 31st. Because, of course, on January 1st, the new tax year starts, right? So if you do anything, if anything that could be liable for taxes in Spain in December 31st, and you move to Spain the following day, on January 1st, they will fall into different tax years, okay? That's the easiest way to understand it. So always verify your travel records, count previous days spent in Spain, and refer to double taxation treaties for guidance on tiebreaker rules in case of conflicts. Sometimes, depending where you move from, one jurisdiction to Spain, sometimes it could be that you are deemed to be a tax resident in both jurisdictions. But if there is a double taxation agreement that exists, normally that agreement will have tiebreaker rules to help understand where you are a resident from a certain date onwards. Now, the consequences of being a tax resident in Spain: you will be subject to taxation on worldwide income and potentially the net value of your assets as well, via the wealth tax and solidarity tax in Spain. If you're a non-tax resident, only the income and assets sourced or located in Spain are taxable, right? I'm talking about non-residents. It depends whether you are an EU passport holder or you're a non-EU passport holder. You can see in the column in the middle, if you're an EU passport holder or associated countries like Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, that the effective tax rate for example, employment for income, okay, as a non-resident is 19%, okay? Whereas if you're a non-EU passport holder, income generally is taxed as a non-resident at 24%, for example, rental income. Now, let's talk about tax systems and obligations in Spain, or tax regimes. You have a general tax regime and you have a special tax regime, also known as Beckham law. For the general tax regime, you will include personal income tax, or IRPF, Impuesto sobre la Renta de las Personas Físicas, wealth tax, okay, Impuesto sobre el Patrimonio, solidarity tax, which is a nationwide wealth tax, okay, and the 720 informative form for declaring overseas assets. We're going to go through all this in detail later on. Now, let's talk about the special tax regime, Beckham law, right? 99.99% of cases for eligibility for this special tax regime is that you are an employee working for a non-Spanish company moving for work in Spain. So, therefore, if you're a self-employed contractor, 1099, for example, in the States, and you move to Spain, usually you will not qualify, right? That's important to understand. Now, there are pros and cons for the special tax regime. Advantages: pros, a flat 24% tax rates. That applies to employment income only sourced in Spain. You will not pay taxes on your income for employment sourced outside of Spain. You don't pay Spanish income tax on your worldwide income, as I said. And, for example, you will not be required to submit your 720 form disclosing your overseas assets, okay, or pay wealth tax. Now, there are some cons, okay, there are disadvantages for the special tax regime of Beckham law. Therefore, many tax advisors recommend not applying for this regime if you make less than 55,000 euros taxable income per year, right? Because the advantages are minimal, and with the general tax regime, you will get more allowances and more advantages and probably pay less tax. Okay, and also there is an additional administrative burden that may outweigh the benefits of applying for the Beckham law if you make less than this threshold. Okay, so have that in mind. Now let's start talking deeper into each of these obligations. First, tax obligations is the overseas assets reporting, or 720 form, where you declare the assets and rights held abroad. You will declare by different categories. Okay, so your assets and rights will be grouped in different categories. For example, bank accounts, investments, okay, real estate, now cryptocurrencies via the 720 form. The threshold is to declare is 50,000 euros per category. So if you have 10 bank accounts with 5,000 euros in each of those bank accounts, you will have to declare all of those 10 bank accounts, because the bank account category adds up to 50,000 euros, which is the minimum threshold to declare, right? Now, there is a first-year requirement in which you become a Spanish tax resident, where you do a full disclosure of your overseas assets via the 720 form, okay? And in the subsequent years, you must only declare again if there are certain variations, or let's say variations over a certain threshold by category, which is 20,000 euros per category, or if you close assets, right? Or, for example, you sell a property, okay? Or, yeah, basically. The deadline to submit the 720 form is March 31st, the following year for the previous year. So you will declare the net value of your assets by December 31st, 2025, by March 31st, 2026, right? And normally if you work with a gestor or accountant or tax advisor, you will start preparing this declaration on January 1st, right? So 3 months. And you will have to, of course, submit different types of documents and statements in order to show the ownership of these different assets abroad. Okay, but I was reading a guide to do it myself, the 720 form, just to explain it here in this webinar. But I'm telling you, it is quite complex. The guide is out there. If you are interested, I send you the link. Send me an email to hello@spainguru.es, and we'll share with you the link. And there you will have the guide on how to do it by yourself. But even myself, that I'm a Spanish speaker, I didn't understand it very well, so I wouldn't risk it and go with a gestor or tax advisor. Now let's talk about with the second tax obligation, income tax filing. Okay, probably the most important obligation tax-wise here in Spain and anywhere else probably. The types of taxable income. You will have ordinary income, okay, or investment income. Under ordinary income, which are subject to progressive tax rates that range from 19% to 47%, you have salaries, rental income, and business earnings. Now, for investment incomes, you will have dividends, interest, capital gains tax, and these are taxed at lower rates that range 19% to 30%. It was recently changed, the top bracket, from 28% to 30% in January this year. Now, the deadline to file this for people who are not autonomous, okay, is, for everyone, is June 30th. This is the annual income tax declarations. But the thing is, if you are an autonomo or contractor in Spain, you will also have to do income tax quarterly filings, where you pay 20% tax, okay, like, by default. And then at the end, let's say when you declare the annual tax, they will do the difference. They will calculate the difference. So if you pay too much, they will give you back, which is usually not the case, because 20% income tax, it is just over the 19% minimum threshold. Okay, so it's very unlikely that you will get some money back, and you will probably have to pay the difference. You will pay over 20%, and you will have to pay the difference. But at least the invoice will not be so big when you pay your annual tax if you have been paying your quarterly income tax the previous year, right? So this is only the case for autonomous, that you pay quarterly income tax. Otherwise, you will just pay an annual income tax by June 30th, okay, of the following year. Right now, specifically for U.S. citizens, you know that if you are a U.S. passport holder, you are always a taxpayer in the States, but there are double taxation agreements. Thank God there are taxation agreements between Spain, and Spain has double taxation agreements with many countries, more than 100 countries, if I'm not wrong, UK, Canada, Australia. You just, the list is very, very long. In the case of the US, therefore, you will not pay taxes on the same category, okay? Double, like twice, right? So if you pay income taxes in Spain as a Spanish tax resident, you will credit the payment of those income taxes in Spain towards your income tax in the US. Therefore, in the US, normally you won't have to pay anything. You will have to file, but since you pay generally more in Spain, you will not have to pay taxes in the US, right? So in April 15th is the normal deadline for US passport holders. If you live abroad, you have an automatic extension of your filing that year. That goes until June 15th. As you know, there's a deadline for Spanish taxes in June 30th, but normally you could, file your taxes in Spain before June 15th, and with that filing in Spain, you will credit that towards your taxes in the US. You can also request another extension. I think it is until October, if I'm not wrong, paying a little interest, etc. But also there is this other possibility. So that's how normally people in the US passport holders do it, okay? Just a quick moment. Over 60% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. That's a lot of people getting value without hitting that button. If my videos have helped you understand Spain's immigration process, visas, or life here, even just once, please subscribe now. I'm working hard to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2025, and your click truly makes a difference. Thanks so much. Now, let's keep going. $1 million question. Is it true I will pay 45% tax for 100,000 euros taxable income? Okay, well, it's not that many people make 100K per year, but for the purpose of this example, this is an illustrative example on how the progressive tax brackets work for income tax and many other taxes who use progressive tax brackets. Okay, so a lot of people, just making round numbers, think that since 100K fall in under the fifth tax bracket, you can see on the right there's a table with the progressive rates that go from 19% to 47%. And the fifth tax bracket is for income between 60,000 euros to 300,000 euros to 45%. Right? So people say, like, is it true that if I pay 100K, I will pay 45%? No, that's not how progressive tax brackets work. Thank God. You will pay 19% for the first 12,450 euros that you make, taxable income, of course, without allowances, deductions, or after allowances, deductions, expenses, etc. Okay, then you will pay roughly 24% for the next 7,500 euros. You will pay 30% for the next 15,000 euros. Okay, and so on and so on. Therefore, you will pay, let's say, an average or median of all those tax brackets. Therefore, the effective tax rate for taxable income of 100,000 euros is 36%, which is not low, of course, but it is not as high as 45%. So don't be so scared, about this, because this is the way that you calculate it, and you will not pay as much as some people think. And this is also for illustrative purposes only. This is a simplified way of seeing it, but I have calculated the different effective tax rates for the different income amounts of, for example, starting at 30,000 euros, effective tax rate is 24%. For 40K, 26%, 50K, 29%, 60K, 30%, 70K, 32%, 100K, 36%. You can see it's a progressive system, right? Now, third tax obligation, wealth and solidarity taxes. Let's talk about the regional wealth tax. It's a regional. So there are 17 regions in Spain, okay, like Andalusia, Valencia, Catalonia, etc., etc. Each of them, they have a specific wealth tax, okay? So it will have a strong impact whether you move to one region or another. For example, Catalonia is bad. Remember that for the wealth tax and for many other taxes too, like transfer tax. Madrid is the best one, okay, and also for the transfer tax, okay. So basically, Madrid and Andalusia, for example, they have very high thresholds, okay, to kick in the wealth tax, okay, or they have 100% rebate. Therefore, basically, there's no wealth tax in those two regions. Now, Valencia has voted to increase the threshold to 1 million euros net value of your assets, okay, as of December 31st, starting this year, okay, end of this year, right? But Catalonia, this wealth tax starts at only 500,000 net wealth, right? The value of your net wealth, okay? You have allowances, you have deductions, right? But it will depend on where you move. So choose wisely. If you're in this situation, if you are a wealthy individual, you will please get tax advice in order to understand where you should establish your tax residency. And also be careful, because if you become an autonomo in one region and then you move to some other region, tax authorities may deem you to be a tax resident where you became an autonomo, not where you live. All right, so be careful with that. And this is calculated over the net value of your assets and rights held anywhere in the world. Yes, so you via the 720, they will know what you have abroad, and you have to do a calculation of all this, right? So there's also something that you have to have in mind is the 60% rule. Okay, again, this rule. It sounds easy, like 60% rule. I read it 1,000 times, and there's no way I can explain it very clearly. Maybe I will take the time to explain it in a specific slide. But basically, something that I want you to have in your head is that it is especially interesting for people who have a big wealth, okay, but they don't have a lot of income, right? So you can reduce your wealth tax by up to 80%, okay, because this rule will limit your tax liability by 60% of your taxable income. Right, so the wealth tax cannot exceed a certain threshold if your income, over your taxable income, right? So let's not enter into too much detail. Have it in mind so when you consult with your tax advisor and see if you fall under this rule. Now, the deadline for the wealth tax, Impuesto sobre el Patrimonio, is June 30th, the same as income tax. You start preparing it like 3 months before, okay? And then there is the solidarity tax that, as opposed to the wealth tax, is a nationwide wealth tax. The difference is that it kicks in at a higher threshold of 3 million without allowances, right? Normally you have a certain allowance of 700,000 euros exemption, okay? And also you have certain deductions that you can make. And also if you have paid wealth tax, you can deduct what you have paid wealth tax as wealth tax towards the solidarity tax. The deadline is 1 month after, so they know if you have paid wealth tax, you can credit that towards your solidarity tax. Okay, but remember that you can't escape this by moving to certain regions. However, the threshold is much higher, the solidarity tax. Okay. Now, third tax obligation, wealth. We continue talking about the wealth and solidarity taxes. Okay, and as I mentioned, there is breaking news for Valencia. They increased the threshold, so from 500,000 to 1 million euros. That's fantastic news for wealthy people who don't want, who want to move to Valencia, which is a fantastic place, and also a lot of questions about like what happens, how do you calculate this if I moved as a married couple, for example. How do I calculate this? So it will depend on the regime of your assets within your marriage, right? So here in Spain we have two regimes. One is separación de bienes and gananciales. Separación de bienes means that each of you in your marriage have your different assets under your different names. You don't have shared assets, okay? But gananciales, the family unit counts as a one unit, okay? One person, let's say, and every asset held by any of those after the marriage will count to be 50% for each, right? So the exemptions and allowances count individually, but the way that you calculate the net value of your assets will count differently depending on, for each of the individuals, depending how much percentage you own, depending on the regime of your assets inside your marriage, right? So let's continue. We have here a use case scenario, or a specific case scenario, like someone who lives in Catalonia, right? How much wealth tax will this person pay? Imagine that this person also has a property, okay, is a property owner of a property somewhere in Spain. Doesn't have to be in Catalonia, it could be anywhere, as far as I understand. So that is an allowance that you also have, or a deduction, okay, from your taxable income for wealth tax. So as we said, Catalonia is one of the least favorable regions to move to as for the wealth tax. The threshold is only 500,000 euros net value of your assets. But if you hold a property, you have a property as well, you can deduct up to 300,000 euros, okay, which is a normal property in Spain, the normal property value, right? So imagine that this person calculates 1 million euros in assets value. So you deduct 500,000 euros, general allowance, okay, and you deduct 300,000 euros from the taxable income. That's 800,000 euros that you can deduct. Therefore, the taxable amount is only 200,000 euros. You apply the progressive tax rates of the wealth tax, and you get that you have to pay a little bit less than 500 euros for that year. Now, if you have 1.5 million euros, you deduct, you have 700K taxable income, you pay 3,000 euros. For 2 millions, you pay 8,000 euros. For 2.5 millions, you pay 13,000.8K, right? So this is how you calculate the wealth tax, approximately, for illustrative purposes only. Remember that there is a Q&A session at the end after this presentation. If you have to leave early, but you think that the information that I share today with you is valuable, you want to say thank yous in a way, or you want to help others to find this webinar or video on YouTube, please leave a review on Trustpilot, and I will be extremely and forever thankful for you. Thank you so much, and let's continue. Let's have a few slides about digital nomads. What about taxes for digital nomads moving to Spain? Now, for example, if you moved as a digital nomad in Spain, you can move as two different statuses, right? As an employee working remotely for a non-Spanish company, or as a contractor or autónomo in Spain, okay? So one is W-2 in the US, and the other one would be 1099. Now, if you move as an employee, right, and usually at the beginning, many employees were accepted. They were providing the social security certificates from their origin countries. But then after a few months, after 2023, only the social security certificate of the UK was accepted, okay? So only really employees from the UK were obtaining the digital nomad visa in Spain. But now, recently, in the last month, the certificate of coverage from the US has started to be accepted as well. So employees, W-2 employees from the States are being accepted as well, which is extremely interesting. And it's also extremely interesting tax-wise, because as we said, 99.99% of cases for eligibility for the special tax regime of Beckham law are employees working for non-Spanish companies. This is very interesting. As long as you haven't lived in Spain for the previous 5 years, okay, and other eligibility conditions, but mainly working as an employee in Spain for a non-Spanish company makes you eligible for the Beckham law. Okay, so remember, if you're making more than 55K annually, it is interesting to evaluate whether you register under the special tax regime that will last for 5 years plus the year in which you apply. You have 6 months to apply from your arrival in Spain, and therefore it's something that is pretty interesting, okay, to consider. Now, if you're moving as a contractor, okay, and you have to become autónomo, okay, which is the contractor figure in the Spanish tax, in front of Spanish tax authorities, this is how you call it, autónomo, yes, you will be required to contribute to Spain's social security system, which will provide you access to public healthcare in Spain, which is world class, I have to say. And therefore, you won't need to provide a private health insurance policy when you apply for the digital nomad visa, because you promise you will become autónomo as long as they grant you the digital nomad visa. You will register as autónomo, you will start paying taxes as autónomo, you will start to pay social security, and that's enough. You will be covered with full coverage, health coverage, so therefore it is not compulsory to obtain a private health insurance, right? So contractors are not considered to be employees, And you will have to manage your own tax filings. A lot of people ask, like, is this something easy to do and everything? I'm telling you, no, it is absolutely no. Try to get a gestor or accountant or tax advisor or software. You can find on Spainguru.es any of those combinations. And I'm personally using TaxDown for my own paperwork, as I'm autonomous as well. And I'm telling you, I tried last year to do it without a software, and I'm telling you, I made so many mistakes. And I'm now pretty, let's say, thankful to have changed to professional, because really you have to become a tax expert in order to apply for the taxes here. So yeah, that's my feedback about it. Now, the deadlines for tax responsibilities or obligations as a contractor, as I said, you need to do quarterly filings and payments for income. If you also have VAT in your invoices, normally as a digital nomad, you will have foreign customers. Okay, therefore you will not charge VAT to them. Therefore, you don't have to pay VAT, but still you have to file saying that, well, I haven't charged VAT and I don't have to pay VAT, but you have to do your quarterly filings and an annual filing in January for your VAT as well. Okay, and then of course you have your annual obligations, right? Now let's talk also about a common question or situation in which someone moves as a digital nomad in the second half of the year. Therefore, less than 182 days in Spain. Therefore, not a tax resident in Spain, right? But people say, like, oh, if I register for Autónomo, then I would become a tax resident in Spain. So there's a little bit of gray area here. Depending who you ask, you're going to get a different answer. But for example, this person arrived in Spain in September, applied for the digital nomad visa in October, was approved in November, and registered as Autónomo in December, right? As an expert says, this is a particularly gray area, as you weren't resident until you got your TIE card, which is the residency card. So you weren't officially allowed to work in Spain, but you are supposed to pay tax in the country where you are physically working, right? So even if you are like working remotely, but you are sitting on a chair on a desk which is located in Spain, that work is taxed by Spanish authorities. But since you are not a Spanish tax resident, you will pay income tax on that income, okay, just because you are located in Spain, right? But as a non-resident, at least in 2024. Then in 2025, you will become a Spanish tax resident, and then you will pay for your income as a resident, okay? This is how let's say most knowledgeable tax advisors will tell you to do. If you want to know more about the Spanish digital nomad visa, you can join my webinar that I have on a bi-weekly basis. I go much more in depth into the taxes and many more things, okay? And actually tomorrow is the next one, right? You have also recordings on my YouTube channel, but there's so many news and so many things that change that I highly recommend you joining every single one that is new, because I upload them all because there's so many changes. So yes, let's continue with the general, let's say, presentation, and not exclusively focusing on digital nomads. Let's talk about other taxes in Spain, okay? For example, inheritance and gift tax. This is Impuesto sobre Sucesiones y Donaciones. This is a regional tax. So again, like wealth tax, for example, or transfer tax, those regional taxes, there is a deep implication on where you move in Spain, where you have your properties, where you have your rights, where you die, okay? If you die in Catalonia, it's going to be expensive compared to Madrid. Okay, it's much cheaper and affordable for your heirs if you died in Madrid and your assets were in Madrid. Trust me. So yeah, it's important that you consider engaging with tax professionals to understand also the implications of where you move, and include the inheritance and gift tax as well. And now the authorities are becoming extremely controller about gift taxes, especially between parents and children and everything, because they want to basically make money from anywhere they can. So be careful with that. Now, let's talk about transfer tax. If you plan to purchase a property, for example, in Spain, it can be a new property, new build, or a second-hand property, right? So new build properties pay a VAT of 10% nationwide. Now, if you buy a second-hand property, okay, you will pay a regional transfer tax instead. So again, depending on where you move, where you buy the property, okay, you will pay starting from 6% of the property purchase value up to 11% as an individual. Okay, for example, in Catalonia, they raise this to 20% if you are a company, right? So basically, it's impossible to buy a property in Catalonia as a company. But in Andalusia, for example, it's 7%. So if you buy a property here in Andalusia, let's say that you buy a property here in Andalusia, you bought it in January, you pay 300,000 euros, it's 7%. After signing the property deeds, you have up to 60 days to pay 7% of that amount. So 7% of 300,000 is 21,000 euros. You have 60 days to pay it. So you also have to calculate having that cash in order to pay that tax. Okay, this is a bit different from the USA, for example, where you pay this when you sell your property and not when you buy it, right? So it's much more favorable for the person buying because you can buy it without paying so much tax. You rent it for 20 years, you save the money, and then you pay the tax when you sell it. Okay? It would make more sense, but as I said, here in Spain, you can see a little bit the pointy teeth of the tax authorities in these details. Okay, not only in the, let's say, in the effective tax rates. Now, Mr. Pedro Sanchez, Prime Minister of Spain for the last 7 years, has announced 100% increase. Sorry, not 100% increase. That the transfer tax becomes 100% of the purchase price for non-European passport holders who are non-residents. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. Let's talk about the property tax. Once you are owner of a property, you will pay impuestos sobre bienes inmuebles. This is the property tax, which is an annual tax based on the cadastral value of your property. So depending where you move, where you buy your property, depending on the city or the area, the amenities of your property, the neighborhood, if you have a swimming pool, if you have a backyard, if you have, it will depend a lot. For example, here in Malaga, where I live, in Malaga city, the property tax is much lower than in neighboring areas like Torremolinos or Rincón de la Victoria. They can be double the amount, okay, for different reasons. They have their local rates, okay, and you have to know that in advance when you buy a property, okay. But usually the property tax in Spain is, let's say, 12 times less than what Americans are used to pay in their for their properties, more or less. That's what I hear. For example, if I pay here 300 euros per year for a certain property in the US, that's what they would pay on a monthly basis, right? Now, let's talk about municipal capital gains tax, impuestos sobre el incremento de valores terreno, naturaleza urbana, plusvalía municipal. So, when you sell a property, you have basically two tax ramifications. No, first is the income that you make because of selling your property, and the second one is the plusvalía municipal, right? And here we have a difference in this slide. So the capital gains tax is about the income that you make, okay? And it's a national income tax, okay, IRPF. So it's the profit that you make, right? That you have to pay ranging from 19% to 30%, as we saw before, right? But then also there is the plusvalía municipal, which is a local tax that you have to pay, and it's based on the increase of the land value, okay? So it is a bit different, and you have to pay both taxes. One is for the city, and the other one is when you do your income tax filing. Now, moving forward, this breaking news about Mr. Pedro Sanchez scaring everybody by the 100% purchase price transfer tax. He's been announcing this. Now they're discussing this internally in the Congress. They're trying to see the legal ways to pass this increase. So, for example, what he says is that, oh, you're a non-European, non-resident. Be careful. If you're a resident, it wouldn't apply this to you, right? But until you are a resident, imagine that you come here under the no-lucrative visa. You move to Spain under a no-lucrative visa. Took months for you to obtain this visa. You're still a non-resident. This would apply to you. Once you arrive to Spain, it takes you weeks, if not months, to obtain the residency card. Okay, so all those months you are still a non-resident, effectively, in Spain, right? So it would apply to you until you get your tarjeta de residencia or TA card, right? And then the transfer tax, if you're a non-resident, it will be the same as the purchase price, therefore making it very, very difficult for you to buy a property, making like absolutely insane. But I have interviewed Ainhoa Manero, who is an expert immigration lawyer, and also Marco Gonzalez, who is an expert tax advisor, tax lawyer, okay, who works closely with Ainhoa. And they say that it is virtually impossible that this happens, okay? Virtually impossible, because this would go against certain basic principles and rights from the European Union, okay? That should be illegal, that they penalize non-residents with this, okay? I give you the TDLR, but watch the videos on Spanguru's YouTube channel and learn more. But be careful, because nobody says it is impossible. They say virtually impossible, okay? So, yeah, let's have a close look. And of course, on Spanguru, I will inform you. If you follow me on Spanguru's YouTube channel, social media, and everything, I will inform you immediately if something like this would happen. Now, let's talk about capital gains tax. I saw that someone was asking about capital gains tax, how to avoid it. Now, finally, let's answer that question. How can I avoid the Spanish capital gains tax? Right. So, first of all, there are ways to avoid capital gains tax if you comply with certain conditions, like being over 65 years old And if you sell your property where you have your primary property where you have been living for the last 3 years, you don't pay capital gains tax as far as I understand. Or and maybe you have to reinvest at least all the sales proceeds into a new property, okay, within 2 years, and those 2 years can be retroactive, and so on and so on, right? So this is the case. Read better the rules. I don't remember them perfectly, so I could be making a mistake, but this more or less would be the case to be protected for the capital gains tax. But if you are selling outside of Spain and moving to Spain, the best way to avoid Spanish capital gains tax altogether is to sell your property in a year in which you are not a Spanish tax resident. Therefore, for example, as we said, Spanish tax resident year is a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st. Therefore, if you sell your property in December and you move to Spain in January, they fall into different tax years. This is the first case on this slide, right? But if you sell during the same calendar year, right? If you sell your property in March, for example, don't enter Spain until July 2nd, because you will only be in Spain 182 days, therefore not becoming Spanish tax resident during that year. Therefore, what you did that year is not paying taxes in Spain, right? So yeah, this is the best way to avoid it, by timing your entry to Spain and by timing the amount of days that you spend physically in Spain. Now, CGT, you can see there the tax rates range from 19% to 30%, okay? And the allowances and the ways to also avoid it, as I mentioned before. This is the plusvalia versus CGT comparison slide. And this is a CGT case scenario, right? For example, if you bought a property for 100K and you sold it for 200K, you made a capital gain of 100K, right? Therefore, your capital gains tax is income tax, and you would pay the progressive tax rates, and as I explained you how you calculate them. For the first 6,000 euros, 19%, 44% 21, 23, okay? So, they range from 19% to 30%, and they have these different tax rates. So you would pay a total of 22,000 euros, which is 22%, okay, over those 100K income that you made, okay, rough numbers, right? So if you have to pay CGT in Spain, normally it's around 20, 22, 23% tax for your gains, okay, more or less, the number to have in mind, right? Of course, if you can avoid it, why not? Now let's talk about retiring in Spain. Is your pension taxable? Also a $1 million question. So if you're a Spanish tax resident, so therefore if you spend over 183 days in Spain, your pension is taxable in Spain, and you will pay income tax on that. Now the threshold for declaring pensions, if you have a sole income source of 22K, annual threshold, you don't have to declare it. However, if you have multiple income sources, the threshold goes down to 12,000 euros of aggregate income and only 1,500 euros for secondary sources. Now, something important. If you are getting a pension from abroad, that appears as a second payer. So if they're greater than 1,500 euros a year, you need to file it at least. Progressive tax rates are, again, 19% to 47%, and they apply. And there are some specific rules for US, UK nationals and other nationals depending on their double taxation agreements. But basically, for the US and UK, Social Security and private pensions are taxable, but government pensions or public sector pensions are exempt. Okay, you pay taxes in your origin country, but not in Spain, right? There are allowances for pensioners, which is ages 65 to 74 is 6,700 euros annual allowance. And for over 75 years of age, 8,100 euros annual allowance. And there's also allowance for anyone else. Of course, it will depend if you have family or not, children, etc., etc. There are different thresholds, which I don't know them by heart, but yeah, consider that they also exist. Now, let's talk about taxation of American 401k and Roth IRA in Spain. 401k's taxation in Spain. First of all, distributions are taxed as general income at progressive rates from 19 to 47%. These are traditionally exempt from Modelo 720 reporting and wealth tax, but caution is advised due to evolving interpretations. Basically, the evolving interpretations say that you have to disclose those 401ks. Now, Roth IRA's taxation. Investment gains are taxed as income at progressive rates up to 30% and must be reported in Modelo 720 annually based on the account surrender value as of December 31st. This will be subject to wealth tax, as we said, with varying rates by region. Some key considerations, things that you need to know, is that there is a consulta vinculante. This is when an individual asks the tax authorities an official interpretation of the rules. This individual asks about IRAs and 401ks. Should they be always included in the Form 720? And Hacienda, okay, said that yes, the tax authorities said yes, they have to be in the 720. But the tax authorities are not judges, okay? And this is let's say an official interpretation, but it is not a judge saying this, okay? But it's something that you need to understand that this exists, and maybe you can consider speaking about this with your expert tax advisor. And always seek professional advice to ensure compliance and avoid penalties. If you want to read more content about taxes in Spain, especially if you're a US, UK national, read on Spainguru.es my articles. You can watch also the videos where I explain everything. And there you have the QR codes if you want to binge read some content about taxes. Now let's talk about non-lucrative visa. And this is also a very asked question, especially after the new Reglamento de Extranjería, or regulation of the immigration law in Spain, took effect last May 20th, 2025, right? Where they ask a minimum stay of 183 days in Spain in order to be able to renew the non-lucrative visa or any other temporary visa. That is any visa that is less than 5 years, right? So, very important. They have included this minimum stay requirement, but the minimum stay requirement is 183 days in an immigration year. As we said, immigration year is a natural year, and the tax year is calendar year. So they can overlap, but maybe not, okay? Now, it's important to understand that this requirement was included in the new bylaw or Reglamento de Extranjería. There are two categories, okay? The most important law is the immigration law, which is the 4/2000 law. This is the organic law. It is the father, okay, or mother, the mother law. And then you have the Reglamento, in which establishes mechanisms and procedures that give further details about how this law, the main law, has to be applied. What changed is the Reglamento, okay? But it is lower in hierarchy. It is the daughter, okay, of the mother law, right? Now, there is a Supreme Court ruling that said that a minimum stay requirement for renewal of visas cannot legally be included in the regulation of the law. It must be included in the main mother law, in the organic law. Therefore, it is illegal that this Reglamento asks for a minimum stay requirement of 183 days. Therefore, in the previous Reglamento, they included a 180-day minimum requirement and was deleted, right? So we are in an ambiguous situation right now, and it is absolutely defensible if you stay less than 183 days in your natural year in Spain. They cannot really deny you your non-lucrative visa renewal on this basis, okay? Because the Supreme Court is overpowers the Congress passing illegal things in reglamentos, okay? The reason why they do it is because it is much harder to change the main law. There is more procedures, more political agreements that they don't have, okay? Therefore, they pass this with a reglamento, with a bylaw, but the Supreme Court says, I'm sorry, boys, you cannot have this minimum stay requirement, right? So now, really, the answer to this is that you don't have to become a Spanish tax resident in order to renew your non-lucrative visa. We're talking only a non-lucrative visa renewal or temporary visas. Now, there are minimum stay requirements for other procedures. If you want to get your long-term residence, you need to not having been outside of Spain more than 10 months in the previous 5 years. If you want to apply for Spanish citizenship, after the 2-year fast track, no more than 90 days every 12 months, or different thresholds. But for the renewal itself, this is the situation, right? So if immigration denies your renewal on this basis, it can be successfully challenged in court. I have videos about this, asking Ainhoa Manero, expert immigration lawyer from Stern Abogados, who I highly recommend, telling you this, okay? I'm not an immigration lawyer. I'm not a tax advisor. I'm just repeating the knowledge that I have gathered via interviews of professionals who, of course, tell better answers using better words and expressions, right? And here's the link to the video that I highly recommend you watching. And yeah, basically you will get the answer straight from a lawyer's mouth. Now, we're finishing the presentation before going into the Q&A session. This is a Spanish taxes cheat sheet. Let's take off this thing. Maybe I can just no, I cannot take that green bar with the red button that redirects you to Trustpilot. But basically, this is the taxes cheat sheet 2025, where I try to condense everything that is said in one single page. First, tax resident in Spain. If you spend physically more than 193 days in a calendar year in Spain, and that will make you liable for paying taxes on your worldwide income and potentially your net value of your assets. Second, key tax obligations, Modelo 720 of the Report of Foreign Assets. Personal income tax, you have to pay it on an annual basis by June 30th. But if you're a contractor, you will have to pay quarterly as well. Wealth and solidarity taxes, regional wealth tax, depends where you move, there's different thresholds. Solidarity tax is a nationwide wealth tax that kicks in at a much higher threshold of 3 million euros. Then special tax regime, the Beckham law, if you make less than 55K, consider not applying for it. If you make more, then maybe check your eligibility. But if 99% of cases, you have to be an employee rather than a contractor in order to be eligible. And you have certain many perks, like paying a flat 24% tax rate on your income outside of Spain, etc., etc. Now, taxation of pensions for US and UK nationals under the non-double taxation agreements, pensions and private pensions and Social Security are taxed in the country, but public or government pensions are exempt in Spain with different thresholds. And then you have also taxation on US investment accounts. 401k are taxed as general income with progressive rates, Roth IRAs as well. And the Modelo 720, potentially you need to disclose the value of these accounts. Taxes for digital nomads, we saw employees, we saw contractors, especially focus on contractors on the quarterly declarations or filings for income tax and VAT tax as well. And additional taxes, we spoke about inheritance and gift tax. These are regional taxes, property tax, once you own a property, capital gains tax, how to avoid it if you're moving to Spain, transfer tax that varies depending on the region. We talk about the VAT if you buy a new build property, and the deadlines we said, the 720 form, March 31st, personal income tax, June 30th, wealth tax, June 30th, the solidarity tax, July 31st, and the quarterly payments if you're self-employed. How can Spainguru help? Well, you can find vetted professionals. At least I recommend you to engage with immigration experts and tax advisors, potentially with financial planners. You can find it on Spanguru.es. If you go to the top menu, services, tax advice, and financial services, you will find there how to engage with them. And then you have many other services like health insurances, medical certificates, etc., etc. So I really recommend you to engage with professionals. And this is another cheat sheet with the deadlines that we just mentioned. Okay, so I'm going to be recording this and uploading to YouTube if you want to look at it later on. Maybe print it if you want and put it on your wall so you don't forget your deadlines and avoid fines. And of course, you can join my other webinars. I have non-lucrative visa Q&A sessions as well. Move to Spain, digital nomad visa, and Portugal golden visa. And of course, let's stay in touch. You can always email me at hello@spanguru.es. I always answer my emails, trying to give you the best of my answers, but at least I will point you in the right directions, articles there, videos, maybe joining communities or answers from other community members that can help you get an answer for any question that you send. Join the Facebook groups, watch the YouTube channel, join the newsletter. All these are free. You can opt out anytime if you no longer want to see or watch or receive that in your inbox. Of course, you can do it. You're free to go away. And remember, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not legal or tax advice. Please consult with an experienced tax advisor that you can find on Spanguru.es. Now let's go with the Q&A session. And if you haven't done it yet and you have to go earlier, please leave a review on Trustpilot. You can push the button on the top, the green bar, the red button. And now we're going to go to the questions. First question. First of all, thank you for joining today, Maria Siriza. Maria. So this means that we pay capital gains tax in the US and Spain. It's not that a double tax. As far as I understand, whatever you pay in Spain for the same category as per the taxation double taxation agreement, you wouldn't pay taxes on the same category twice. Okay, so in many places in the US, you don't have capital gains tax, as I understand. So it's also something to check. Amador Roman, thank you for joining today. It's good to die in Madrid tax-wise. What about Andalusia? It's also good. Die in Andalusia if you can. I mean, Andalusia also has a very favorable inheritance and wealth tax. Inheritance, gift tax, and wealth tax, and transfer tax. Okay, more or less, Andalusia mimics Madrid, more or less. They don't have the same rates for everything, but they have the same party ruling, which doesn't mean too much because Valencia, for example, had all these years also PP, okay, but they didn't have favorable taxes either. And PP is also in Galicia, where the leader of the PP is from, and he's not very good in Galicia with the taxes either. Like, having Pepe doesn't mean that you're going to have low taxes, but some people tend to relate Pepe to low taxes, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not really, to be honest. So yes, in Andalucía, okay, impuesto sobre sucesiones Andalucía. Let me see if I can see for you. I'm going to go to sharing my screen. And here, impuestos sobre sucesiones y donaciones in Andalucía. I don't know how this goes. Really, I don't have this information. Va a seguir hasta euros, tipo aplicable. Ok. ¿Cuál es el impuesto sobre sucesiones y donaciones en Andalucía 2025? Madrid, Andalucía, until 50,000 euros, 7%, and until 800,000 euros, 32%. Okay. So this is a quote by Google. So yeah, but then you will have a bonificaciones or deductions depending on the relationship level. Okay, for example, from father to daughter is going to be less. You're going to have a bigger. It's not the same that it is to a cousin, for example, right, or from a cousin. So yeah, here are some rates here in 2025 for Andalucía. Okay, but then remember that there are these bonificaciones. Okay, and I think the bonificaciones are extremely strong in Andalucía. Now let's go back to the presentation and let's go with the questions. But please don't die. Very important. Please don't die. Live long enough not to pay any taxes in Spain for that reason. Cesar Tolico. Oh, I know you. I know you. Have seen you in the American Sexpa group. To calculate wealth tax on 720 for real estate property, do we use the purchase price or the market value in the year reporting? And which date exactly, mid-year and end year? I don't know exactly. That's a very technical question, Cesar. So I highly recommend you going to a tax advisor to answer those details because I could be wrong. You can find the recommended tax advisors on Spainguru.es. Now let's go with the next one. Are government pensions taxed as income and or wealth? So government pensions, if you come from a country that has a double taxation agreement, such is the case of UK or USA, government pensions should be tax exempt in Spain. Okay, make sure to check with your tax advisor to understand whether your pension is considered to be a government pension. Therefore, it could be tax exempt, okay, in Spain as per the double taxation agreement, right? So this is taxed as income. It is income, right? It is not something that counts for wealth. Wealth is assets or rights held abroad, right? Like a property, okay, or deposits. For example, if you have €1 million in deposits in one bank, that counts for the wealth tax. Okay, your net wealth is €1 million if you don't have anything else, right? Even if it's cash in a bank, right? So that's the difference. Now let's go with the next one. Are rates per individual or couple? Rates for what? I think I mentioned this for the wealth tax. So depending how you hold your assets, if you have together as a single unit, or if you have every individual in the marriage has the assets separated, so by their own name, they will count differently, okay, per individual. But both, let's say, individuals are potentially liable for wealth tax, but the way that you calculate will depend on how you hold your assets within your couple. I'm renewing my NLB next year, July 2025. I will not have completed the new requirement of not exceeding an aggregate 10 months during a 5-year period, which visa will I receive or be eligible for. So as I mentioned before, this is not about taxes, really. This is about immigration. So you're mentioning the minimum stay requirement of, let's say, maximum time outside of Spain, 10 months during a 5-year period. That is if you want to apply for the long-term residence after 5 years of residence in Spain, which is very different than renewing your non-lucrative visa. Renewing your non-lucrative visa doesn't have that stay requirement. As I said, it is a gray area right now because of the court ruling that says that you shouldn't have a minimum stay requirement of 183 days in a natural year in order to renew your visa, okay? But that would be it. If you don't want to have, let's say, friction or want to go to court in case of denial, etc., the minimum stay requirement as per the new Reglamento de Extranjería, effective as of May 20th, 2025, is 183 days in a natural year. That's the minimum stay in order to renew your non-lucrative visa today. But as I said, watch the videos, interviewing Ainhoa Manero, from Stern Abogados that talk about this. And actually, I will share with you. I'm going to go to sharing my screen, and I'm going to go to my YouTube channel and YouTube Spainguru. I'm going to show you this video. Hopefully, it will come up. So let me change the screen sharing because I have premium account in a different Chrome. Let's see, Chrome tab. I have no idea. Here, Chrome tab, here. All right. All right. Unfortunately, I can't. Okay, here it is. So I will go here. I am here at Spanguru's YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Spanguru. I'm going to go to videos, and I'm going to check the minimum stay requirement for the non-lucrative visa video. NLV's financial requirements. I always interview Ainhoa for all these changes, so always stay. Here it is, NLV minimum stay, that one, right? So I will share with you also in the chat the link to this video. But of course, what are you doing? You're not following Spanguru on YouTube? So easy, just push the button, subscribe. That's so easy. Okay, so here we have it. This is the video where she's talking about this. Okay, we saw this now. So she's explaining the difference between the natural tax year, the natural immigration year. So okay, so this is it. So you didn't mention which renewal it is. So if you have been here for 5 years, you can apply for the long-term visa, long-term residence. But if it's a renewal for years 2 and 3 or years 4 and 5 of your non-lucrative visa, of course we're talking 5 years. You have been here 5 years. You have been here 5 years. Okay, so then you can apply for the long-term residence. So in that case, it's not a non-lucrative visa renewal. That's why I was confused by your question. Because it's not a non-lucrative visa renewal, right? So what you have to do is to apply for a new residence, because right now you're under the non-lucrative residence, but you have to apply for the long-term visa, for the long-term residence permit, right? So in that case, yes, you need to comply with the minimum stay, the minimum, let's say, maximum time outside of Spain of 10 months in the previous 5 years. Those 10 months don't need to be consecutive, but they cannot be all together more than 6 months at once. And sometimes, if you don't comply with this minimum, with this stay requirement, you can renew your non-lucrative residence for a third time, depending on the region where you are. I don't know where you are, but some regions, they don't accept renewing your non-lucrative residence for a third time. I don't know about Baleares. I don't know. And the list of regions. There's not so much information about this, but potentially if you don't comply with this maximum time outside of Spain, potentially you could renew your non-lucrative residence as long as you comply with the requirements of the non-lucrative residence, the 28,800 euros main applicant threshold, etc., etc. You have not completed. All right, you have not completed. Right. So yeah, consider checking with a lawyer your options. Consider doing that. Right. But basically, if you go, basically, if you, I'm telling you the answer, but just to be sure that it's a sure shot and you don't make any mistakes, go with a lawyer, at least consult for an hour, make sure that everything is contrasted and that you have a proper strategy for your situation. Of course, the lawyer should check exactly the time that you were outside, if it really counts as you say, just like the doing the formal work, previous work, in order to understand your exact immigration situation and your possibilities to stay in Spain. Okay, so thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. If you haven't done so, if you think the information I share with you today is valuable, if you learned something new today, please leave a review on Trustpilot. You can do it by clicking the red button and the green bar on the top. This video is being recorded. I will upload it on YouTube very soon. Thank you so much for joining today. Send me an email if you need anything, and have a wonderful week. Stay in touch, and goodbye. Thank you.
Oh, and one more thing. Apparently YouTube says you're gonna love watching this video right here. I think you should watch it.